Hello, everyone. I'm here with Reverend Michael Granzen. Michael is the author of a book entitled Our Hearts Are Restless Till They Find Their Rest in Thee, Prophetic Wisdom in a Time of Anguish, Selected Writings and Sermons from Coleman Brown. So this is a new book. That's Michael's first book, and so we're really glad to have him here with us. Michael is a veteran of several of the writers' conferences that we've put together too. So that makes it extra special to be with him here now that he's got a book published. So thank you for joining us, Michael.
Thank you for having me, Brian.
Maybe you could just give us a little bit more about your background.
All right. Well, I am the senior pastor at Second Presbyterian Church, PCUSA in Elizabeth, New Jersey, where we have a vital urban ministry for teenagers and youth, and have partnered in a homeless shelter. And we also have a great writer on staff there, Chris Hedges, the Pulitzer Prize winner, and he is a part-time minister in the prisons in New Jersey, and then of course continues to do his writing. And then I also teach Christian ethics and medical ethics at New Brunswick Theological Seminary. And I'm continuing to do some new things, especially now, I think, writing. And I'm thankful for Coleman Brown, who was my teacher, mentor, friend for many years, from the time began when we were at Colgate University. And so it's my honor to have helped pull together this book and launch it for others to read. Some of this, as it says, prophetic wisdom in a time of anguish.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, Coleman Brown is not exactly a household name, so he's probably pretty unfamiliar to a lot of folks. Could you give us a little bit more background on him, who he was, and what, inspired you to put together this book?
Okay, well, just real quick, Coleman went to Princeton University. I think he was like 2 years behind Frederick Buechner at Princeton. And then he went to Union Theological Seminary in New York, also 2 or 3 years behind Frederick Buechner. And he apprenticed in the East Harlem Protestant parish, and went to work in an inner city church in Chicago. And this was in the late 60s. And he had Dr. King preach at his pulpit and participated in the Freedom Campaign and marches in Chicago. And then he went to Colgate University in the early 70s after King was assassinated, and he became university chaplain. So he basically was a teacher, counselor, deep, wise person for almost 30 years at Colgate.
Wow.
And he died about 4 years ago, and he never published a book. But he was an outstanding preacher, and he had other writings. So working with Irene Brown, his widow, and my friend Lisa Masada, we kind of gathered together 30 writings and sermons. And then what we did was get Chris Hedges, who was also a student of Coleman's, to write, well, he had written an essay, My Teacher. And then Peter Oakes, who teaches at the University of Virginia, was a young colleague of Coleman's at Colgate. And he kind of wrote my mentor colleague, the prelude. And then finally, we got Coleman's youngest son, Joshua, to write a really brilliant essay called My Dad, Coleman Brown. So, it was an honor, like I said, to pull together some of these fragments that give you a glimpse of the holy fire that was at work in Coleman Brown.
Well, he must have been incredibly gifted, because it sounds like, he really impacted his students, in particular, right?
Yeah, it was kind of old school, a very Socratic approach where you would take a course with Coleman but people would line up. He had like a little book he'd take out, and you'd get an appointment with him in his office that was filled with books. And he was just a deep listener, and he'd listen to you, and then there would be silence, and then out of his kind of depth, he would speak. And I often found these conversations illuminating and transforming. I mean, he would say things like, "Michael, it's time to go to the fire." And it was like, and God was in the fire, you know. And then I realized that it wasn't just Michael. There were literally dozens and hundreds of students that Coleman had this tremendous impact on.
Wow. What an amazing person.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I can see why you were, motivated to kind of like bring his work to life, to light. Just like with Frederick Buechner, you don't want that incredible brilliance to go away or fade away or not be recognized as fully what it should be.
Because I remember reading Frederick Buechner's book, The Gospel as Tragedy, Comedy, and Fairy Tale, when I was living in Boston, and I was going through, it's like sometimes there's a perfect storm where you're crying out from the depths. And I read that book, and it really helped change my life. And in a way, some of these sermons and writings from Coleman, they have that same kind of depth.
It sounds like it.
Yeah. So it's that kind of prophetic wisdom.
Well, like I said, it's really good that you captured this and put it into a book. How would you say that it's relevant for people today?
Well, we started on this book project, a little over a year ago, and it was published May 27th, right? And so we didn't entirely know the circumstances all a year ago. And, we put the subtitle Prophetic Wisdom in a Time of Anguish. And here we are in a deep valley, I would call it, that we're walking through individually, and in some ways interconnected together. And we need guidance, I think, all of us in different ways. So it's relevant to that existential situation of COVID-19 that we're all dealing with in different ways. And also, it connects with, I think, the Black Lives Matter movement for racial justice, because Coleman was a descendant of the abolitionist John Brown. And in between the lines, and in some of the sermons in particular, there's a very strong passion for justice and for racial justice. And actually, I was able to reach out through my friend Chris to Cornel West, who knew Coleman and spoke at Colgate several times. And at one point, he asked Coleman to stand and acknowledged and affirmed his work for racial justice. So Cornell's quote, to get an endorsement, and we put it on the front cover, Coleman Brown, a descendant of the abolitionist John Brown, brought to the pulpit the same prophetic fire and passion for justice as his martyred ancestor. So that's very relevant. And in a way, I said earlier, we had no idea what the circumstances would be when the book came out.
Sure. It's interesting, the timing, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think the other thing I would say is there's a little bit, take what you like and leave the rest. Coleman was always very inclusive and open, and he used to have at his home a group for seekers, believers, and doubters. And he really held questions at the center of his pedagogy. He would teach and listen and lift up a question that somebody would ask. And I found to articulate our deeper questions would give clarity to our confusion. It wouldn't give us the answer, but it would help give clarity and light to our confusions. So that is the approach in this book. There may be some of Coleman's writings that really resonate, like he has a one called Our Anger. And that really rings true for me. And it fits very much today. And then he has others that may or may not, reach people in the same way. And Coleman was totally open to that, take what you like and leave the rest.
Well, using questions, is such an excellent tool, not just in theology, but business and, pretty much any other endeavor.
Yeah. Yeah. And one other thing I'd say is that after I graduated, the continuing dialogue and conversation with Coleman. And when I was in my younger days, I started a youth group in Elizabeth and had a kind of church basketball ministry and tutoring, would say about 10, 15 kids, Saturday night, Tuesday night. And unfortunately, in around 1999, there was a group of Elizabeth police. They were called the Family, an all-white supremacist group. And they would target black and brown young men. Sometimes they would plant drugs on them. And this came out in a New York Times front page article in May 2000 called Blue Shadows in Elizabeth. But what happened was some of my young people got beaten by the Elizabeth police unjustly. When I found out, I just wanted to go down to the police station and, bang on the thick plate glass window in rage, and say, how dare you? But I called Coleman. And it was that kind of dialogue and partnership that I realized, that venting would really do very little, if anything, maybe get me in jail. So the transformation of our rage into a kind of holy anger and perseverance in partnership with others, with other pastors, with good police, with federal prosecutors, and with a writer for the New York Times, ended up bringing change in a way that in isolation and just, raw rage would have done nothing at all.
Very cool. That's an excellent story of transformation, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So this was the first book that you've ever done. So what did you learn from the whole process of editing and getting it published and all that kind of stuff?
Well, I think, Coleman used to put up on the blackboard how to hold audacity and humility together. So I think writing a book, you have to have both. You have audacity because it's like, I'm told, there's 1,000+ books published today. And is there something worth saying and getting out there? So there's a certain boldness and audacity to go for it and to initiate it. And I think you also have to have humility because you got to work as a team with other people, and there's things you have to learn. I got a lot from your writing conferences that helped me. And it was like some of it was gestating, and then all of a sudden it came out when the time came, And I remember kind of saying to myself, no excuses now, Michael. Go for it. And I think building a team is very important. The senior editor of theology and ethics at Cascade Books, Charlie Collier, he was a great partner, and the copy editor, Jacob Martin, and then my friend Lisa Masada, who helped pull together the pieces, and then of course connecting with others who Peter Oakes, Chris Hedges, Josh Brown. So somebody though needs to keep pushing it along. So the other piece I think is the perseverance, to not give up. And then the last thing that I learned, I think, is it's like running a marathon. You have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And and the end is like you get the book. And then there's a little bit of a letdown. It's like the kingdom of God has not arrived, but you have finished the race. And then you have to kind of circle around a bit and begin again. It's almost like the title of the book, Our Hearts Are Restless Until They Rest in Thee. There's a certain human and divine restlessness on this earth where we're incomplete. And yet there's the glimpses and the hope against hope of that deep peace in God.
So what surprised you the most out of that whole process of pulling this together?
Well, I think the content of the book, which is deep stuff, and I suggest for those who read it to read just one or two essays or sermons at a time, because it's really deep stuff and it challenges us. That actually the content connected with the process for me. So in pulling this together, it pushed me to go to the deep end of the waters, so to speak. And it challenged me to get back in touch, because sometimes I think what happens, we need to be reminded of what we knew or know and have forgotten. So in a way, what we write and the projects we do, if we take them seriously, they also transform us. So I've reconnected with some of this wisdom that I didn't realize I had at least partly forgotten.
Interesting. So what about the future? What kind of writing projects are you looking to do now or in the future?
Well, I had a great breakfast conversation with my advisor at Drew, where I did a PhD in social ethics with Tracy West. And she strongly suggested that I take the signature thesis and essay from my dissertation, which is called Breaking Through the Plate Glass Window. And it's really about race in America. And it's a case study, a historical case study of Elizabeth, New Jersey.
Wow.
And take and kind of condense that into an opening essay for a book. And I have about 3 or 4 other essays on that same theme, including what I'm calling the Iona paradox. I spent significant time in the Iona community in Scotland. And then I also worked in South Boston, Massachusetts with Fourth Presbyterian Church during a period where there was the desegregation of public housing in the late 80s and early 90s. So, and then finally, another essay would be on Black Lives Matter in dialogue with the interfaith community and what we might call the militant, prophetic, or progressive church community. And so I have colleagues and friends who are very much leaders and part of that Black Lives Matter movement. So I think the closing essay will be on that dialogue. But the overall theme is going to be breaking through the plate glass window. And so it's like beginning a marathon.
Sure.
Get to the next telephone pole.
I mean, I think, until people actually do a book, write a book,
yeah.
You don't have an appreciation for what it really takes. You used the word perseverance earlier, and that's clear to me that is one of the attributes that any author has to have.
Yeah. And that hunger and passion for the race,
Yes. Well, Michael, I really want to thank you for spending some time together with us. It's really been fascinating to learn about you, your work, Coleman's work, and I look forward to helping get the word out about that book, as well as the new book that you're working on when it's ready.
Thank you so much, Brian, and thank you for the excellent work you do.
Well, it's a pleasure. So labor of love. So thank you.
Take care.